How's everybody doing in isolation right now? I know that from what I see online, there tend to be two camps. I think I talked about this in one of my earlier Forgotten Gem reviews. But there are the folks who are like, you know what? I'm not defined by my activities. I'm just going to sit back and chill and enjoy and not worry about anything. And I dig that approach. I respect that approach. And then there are the other group that, no, I'm gonna write a book. I'm gonna do so much exercise that my body begins to look like a road map. I'm gonna cook everything from scratch. I'm gonna learn a new language and play 47 different instruments by the time this is over. And I dig that too. I don't think there's a wrong way to go in times like this. I think you gotta go, to quote Enterprise, you gotta go where your heart takes you. I'm kind of somewhere in the middle. I'm trying to divide the time between getting some rest in, but also I've got this free time. I want to try to use it. I've been trying to write. It's been a while since I wrote a play. I've got a whole series of Blue Ghost plays I want to get through, and so I've been trying to do that. It's not as easy as when I was a kid. Probably because I self-criticize more now than I did then. But I remember when I was younger, junior high, high school and whatnot, man, I'd be in that computer room all night and day writing. Like that'd be my weekend thing. Is Saturday night I'd be in the computer room till like midnight or 1 o'clock just writing short stories, comedy sketches, Star Trek and Jurassic Park fan fiction, not together, separately, back before fan fiction was a thing. So I've always loved writing, and I think I got to imagine this as a universal thing for anybody who's ever written anything. When you write, you're doing it usually because there's a story you want to tell or an emotion you're trying to express. So you create a world in which you can express that or live that life that you want to live easier and under your control. And that's the big appeal, for like writers and directors and whatnot, is that supposedly the world that you're creating, the world that you're working with, is all under your control. And you can't help but wonder, at least I can't help, and I assume most writers can't help but wonder, what would it be like, or wouldn't it just be amazing if I could live in the worlds that I create and live the life of the character that I've put in that is my self-insert character. I usually have some form of self-insert character. And at least I did back then. I don't know if I do so much now, but I think there are examples of that. But yeah, wouldn't it just be great if you could write the world around you and make the world conform to the way you want it to be? And then the question would have to come up, is the world that you create really the world that you want it to be? The age-old question of be careful what you wish for. Interesting idea and interesting premise. And the premise for 1991's Delirious, starring John Candy. I always got to try to adjust so you got to make sure I get this in the light. Right? Good enough. Yeah, another one of those, you're hearing a lot of this on this show, those films that were a mainstay of HBO back in the day that they'd run several times a day. So I've seen this movie a ton, and the writer in me just loves it. It's a movie that I am just drawn to because it is about that age-old question. So for those of you who don't know, what is this movie about? Well, let's talk about that first. So, the late, great John Candy plays the producer and head writer for a fairly popular soap opera called Beyond Our Wildest Dreams, I believe is the name of it. And he's good at what he does, and he likes what he does, but the thing is that in his life, he is a fairly passive player. He is. And we'll come back to why John Candy is just so awesome here in a minute. But the casting of John Candy is brilliant because John Candy perfectly embodies that image of that lonely little kid with an active imagination in the cafeteria who wants to be a cool kid, but for some reason something holds him back. And that's kind of his life. He is very passive in arguments. with his fellow producers. They seem to override him. They overwrite him and do all sorts of stuff to the show that he disapproves of, but he just can't get them to stop. He is desperately in love, or has a huge crush on the lead actress of the soap opera. She barely acknowledges his existence except when she wants something. So he's a very passive player in his own life, even though he wants to be a more active player. Well, circumstances happen, an accident happens, he gets into an accident, and when he wakes up, he is in the world of the soap opera that he has created. More than that, what he finds is that thanks to his typewriter, and since he is the person who created the world in the first place, he finds that he can write what is going to happen, and it happens the way he says it. So now you've taken a writer and put them in a situation where they can mold the world to the way they feel it should be to suit them. Who have you always wanted to be? What have you always wanted to do? You ever want to, be the action hero and do some of those great stunts and adventures and not worry about getting hurt or dying? Click, 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 click. Done. What about that woman who never noticed you existed? Well, now she'll definitely notice you. Click, 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 click. Done. So it's a very fascinating setup. I mean, the first thing I do want to talk about is the concept. The 80s and the early 90s were kind of the heyday for the big idea movie, big idea action movies, and big idea comedies. This was a time when you could make a comedy out of some bizarre situation, and you didn't have to spend a lot of time explaining how it happened or justifying it. It just, this is the concept of the movie, boom, we're there, don't worry about it. So a concept like this is not out of place in the time period. Excuse me. But I think it is one of the more unique comedy setups and movie setups out there because of what it offers. As I said in the intro there, every writer, as far as I know, writes because they are trying to express something, or they are trying to live vicariously through the world that they create. I know I do and have. I'm not saying every writer does it, but I think a lot of them do. They're fantasy, and you'll find that, again, that there is usually a author insert character. So yeah, that idea and that freedom, and who wouldn't want that? Even if you're not a writer, who wouldn't like the idea of being able to control the world to fit you? But, and I think this is where the screenplay is very clever, it's subtle, because they're trying to put the comedy first naturally. So the story details and the plot details are kind of open to interpretation. I don't know if any of this was intended, but it's what I get out of it. The flip side of the coin, as any writer, again, will tell you, is that you may have an idea of what the world should be and what the characters should be, but that doesn't mean the characters or the world always agree, and they will fight against you. I know that sounds weird, and anybody who's never written a play and had a character kind of literally say, I want to go this way, and you're like, no you don't, you're going this way, and the character's like, no I'm not. It happens. And in this instance, that kind of feeling of you can't control everything no matter how much you try. You may think you have a handle on it, but you don't, is embodied by a character he encounters in the soap opera named Janet, played by Mariel Hemingway, who is based off a girl he literally bumps into in the office who was there to audition for the part of Janet the day before his accident. And Janet is a character that he didn't want to put in the soap opera because she didn't think she was that interesting. So this is a character that he doesn't have any interest in trying to impress. It's the character that he doesn't have any real invested interest in. So it's the character that turns out to turn the world much more than any of the stuff he's doing, because characters in the world have a mind of their own. So that right there is an interesting premise. And then when you think about where they apply it and how they, the sequence of scenes. So he writes these grand adventures for him. His main goal is to impress Rachel, which is the character name of the girl on the show that he has the big crush on. I can't remember what her, real fake name is. But he's doing all this basically to impress her. So he writes these huge scenarios where he saves her from being killed on a horse, and he does this great trick riding, or he drives into town in this Ferrari and takes her for a drive and puts a blindfold on himself and tells her to, tell him when to turn and whatnot. So he does all these grand gestures, but then immediately after, every time he does one of these, we see the immediate aftermath. Once the scene is done, he can't ride a horse. He can't fucking drive a manual, And so you see, that, yeah, you've got a handle on this for a while, but the world is always going to take back over. It's also that question. Now, of course, the lesson of the movie is that age-old, be yourself, being yourself is the best thing, and yada, yada, yada. Good message. But again, I like the way that it's done here. He is being, quote-unquote, the person that he always wants to be. He is bolder, he's stronger, he's more confident. But the thing about it is, it's always an act. And it's in those scenes with Rachel that he is always putting on a face. He's always putting on a show. Which is great. It seems like it works. But eventually, you got to drop that mask. And the person he always drops the mask with is Janet, Mariel Hemingway, who sees him as he really is. So we get, and he starts to, that's the character, the person that he is not trying to impress, the person that he is not putting on a show for, that's the one that he forms an actual relationship with. Again, I think a lot of this was intended. The scenes are too well constructed to not be on purpose, but I'm saying I doubt they meant it this deeply. But I really think it's a brilliant use of the mechanic that you've selected. Now, to make something like this work, you got to have a cast that pulls it off, and this has a great cast. I don't know what I can say about, again, the late, great John Candy. Has there ever been a celebrity who seemed like any nicer of a person? Every role he's in, I don't care if it's the scummiest role, I don't care if he's someone like Uncle Buck, there is an underlying likability, and not just likability. Jimmy Stewart had likability. Tom Hanks has likability. John Candy has lovability. You look at him and he looks like the biggest teddy bear ever. And even when he's being all blustery and yelling, you still love him because you just see the teddy bear in him. And that's aided by the fact that at least everything I've ever heard from anybody who ever knew him or worked with him, that is exactly the man that he was. So you really feel like there is a genuineness and a gentleness and again, just a lovability to John Candy and his movies that you don't really feel with a lot of other performers and other performers of his generation or any generation since. You just love the guy, and you need a guy like that to hold up a film like this, because he was not only a great comedian, he was a very good actor. So he could pull stuff like this off. He could do the comedy, but he could also do the more sentimental stuff and get the character arc across. And if you're talking about funny, damn, he was funny. Lord, he was funny. And what I always loved about his comedy, and it's true in here too, is that very little of his comedy was based around the fact that he was fat. His comedy was not the one note, ho, 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 I'm fat. You know, he could do so much. Yeah, he did slapstick, but the reason why the slapstick works with him is, one, he was very funny physically, but two, again, going back to that likability and that lovability, you always had sympathy for him. So you might have laughed when he got hurt, but you weren't necessarily glad that he got hurt. So God bless you, John. God bless you for everything you did. And, you know, kind of wrapping up just talking about John Candy for a second is that, you know, there are very few celebrities who, so long after their passing, you still feel like you miss them. You know, and watching his movies are sometimes very difficult because, like, you still miss the guy. You're just like, man, what a talent and what a great guy he was, just by all accounts. So, I love John Candy. You'll never hear me say a bad word against John Candy, ever. The rest of the cast is fantastic, and they all seem to be having a great time playing with the bigger-than-life soap opera characters that they're given. Of course, Rachel, the bitchy Lady Macbeth, Joan Collins kind of character. You've got her inept doctor boyfriend who does everything she says, every evil plan she comes up with, but he's just a lap dog. You've got the Blake, the suck-up son, who's always perfect. You've got Ty, the screw-up son that the father never gives any credit for. These are just great characters, and the actors are playing them all just to the hilt and having a great time. But aside from John Candy, I think the MVP of this movie has got to go to Raymond Burr. Yes, Perry Mason is in this. He plays Carter Hedison, the head of the evil Hedison family on the soap opera. And what makes it work so well is, much like Leslie Nielsen, much like Lloyd Bridges, much like Robert Stack in Airplane, Raymond Burr was not known as a comedy actor. He was mostly known for very stern, very powerful characters like Perry Mason. You know, so to have him in there delivering these incredibly funny lines with that straight face and that deep voice, it is monstrously funny. And that is another thing about this movie. God damn, is it funny. Holy shit. When I pulled this one out to watch it and review it, I was kind of thinking, okay, it's probably going to be funny, but I've seen it tons of times. You know, it's probably lost a little something in the years. No, the shit that was funny is still funny as fuck. And there are several scenes in here where I laughed so hard that I got lightheaded. There are two great scenes specifically. There's the one where he's first trying to impress Rachel. So he makes sure that all the other characters are away and can't give her a ride, so that she has to take a ride with him. And he fills them with little annoyances from his life. You know, Raymond Burr was going to do it. And they go, I can't, Rachel. The cable TV man is coming. I have black bars on 2 and 7. You know, and then his son is like, well, I can't take her, Dad. I'm having my tires balanced. Now? Why do you have to do that now? I don't know. It's just, I don't know, just the escalation, the timing, so fucking funny. I laughed so hard. And then, of course, the best scene in the movie is at the final act, where John Candy goes to a big party at the Hedison house, and he got drunk the night before to write what was going to happen. So the night is just filled with all of this weird shit that he wrote. He's in there playing the piano. He sings Send in the Clowns. He has a cheerleader he knew in high school come over and talk to him. People are muttering stage directions. And of course, the best line in the movie, and I'm not going to do it justice, where a bunch of waiters come in with a bunch of reindeer, and the bartender needs more cold deer. Not deer! Beer! It's a typo! Use your head, for Christ's sake! I swear to God, I think that every time I do a read-through from one of my new scripts. Because no matter how many times I proofread it, no matter how many times I go over it, there are still 5,000 typos in there, and it seems like the cast reading it take great pleasure in pointing every one of them out. You know? At least that's the persecution complex in me. So yeah, it is still monstrously funny. And I like that it also has a lot of fun with the soap opera tropes. You know, the world that it's in. They have a scene where Raymond Burr is talking to his two sons, and his screw-up son Ty is like, but Daddy, why don't you love me? He's like, stop it, Ty, you're too much like your mother, too thin-skinned. Well, I guess that's why she committed suicide. If it was suicide, da-da! Big music sting, you know. So they have a lot of fun with the premise in the world. Is this movie perfect? No, and there's a couple things to talk about as to what makes this might make it a little iffy for some people. I had this feeling a year or two ago when I rewatched it, but I've changed my mind, and I'll explain why. Again, 80s movies, late 80s, early 90s movies didn't worry too much about the details of how things happen. They also didn't necessarily worry about the morality too much. And I remember watching this a few years ago, and when you look at this movie through a certain light, what you have is a guy basically brainwashing a woman to be sexual with him. If you look at it through a certain light, that's what's going on. And I remember watching this movie and thinking that for the first time, and going, oh, I don't want to think that. No, this ruins the movie for me. And I was also a little worried about that yesterday when I was watching it. Again, it's like, is that going to happen? But rewatching it, I don't feel like that is so much a problem. And here is why. Watching the scenes that he's in and the scenes that he writes to act out, I don't think he actually controls the people so much as he controls the situation around them. Little things like he goes to rescue Mariel Hemingway from some robbers that have broken in, so he writes a fight scene. But in the middle of that fight scene, he gets carried away, and one of the goons punches him and hits him, and he's surprised by it. You know, when he saves Rachel from the horse, you know, they're chasing after each other, and they run through a picnic where she jumps over the horse, but his horse runs right through it, and he goes, sorry, something happened that he didn't plan for. When he writes the scene where he blindfolds himself and he's driving, he has Rachel tell him where to go. At first, she's scared and freaked out by it, you know, and if you were writing that, is that how you'd write it? No. So upon rewatching, I don't think that he is actually brainwashing her or manipulating her. I think he's manipulating the situation and his knowledge of soap operas and the characters to his advantage. Now, maybe that's still not as good to you, or that's still not a good thing, but I think that makes it better. However, I can understand how you could watch this and go, that's a little iffy. Also, I gotta say, I mentioned a second ago the music stings. There's some great music stings in this that has the Hendersons have this great kind of ominous theme. It's very orchestral and really imposing. It's great. And like music stings like the da-da, when something is revealed. But a lot of the other music in this is kind of obnoxious. A goofy scene is happening and goofy music, and I'm not doing the exact music. And you're like, I don't need the music to tell me that it's goofy. I am capable of making that distinction for myself, thank you. So some of the music really gets to me in this. And it's funny because I never noticed that before, but I noticed it this time watching it. Just like, okay, you can tone that down. Only other thing about this movie that I kind of hate is the title. I hate that they give away the fact that the title is Delirious. So they basically give away the fact that he is dreaming all of this right from the get-go, from the title, from the poster, from the advertisements. So it's hard to get invested in it when you know for a fact he's dreaming. The movie has already told you he's dreaming, even though he doesn't think he is. And again, given the time period, late 80s, early 90s, audiences were very open to accepting kind of a lot of weird shit. This was Ghostbusters came out a few years before. Like, you didn't have to tell us that he was dreaming. You could just say that he somehow wound up there, and the audience would kind of go with it back then. There wasn't this kind of nitpicky, culture. So I feel like that kind of hinders you from really getting attached to the situation and attached to the characters a bit, because it's fake. He's dreaming. But again, I think that's a minor problem. It is still a great movie. It is still funny. I would recommend it. It's a great date night movie. You want something kind of light and fluffy that you can laugh at. I think this is a great one. It still holds up, and it still holds up not only to a great concept. It's a time in movies when they would just kind of go for it with concepts and weren't quite as concerned about the weirdness of things as we are now, and a tribute to just one of the best comic actors of his generation, or any generation. I love this movie, and I had just a great time revisiting it. So if you haven't seen it in a while, check it out. If you've never seen it, give it a look. I think you'll enjoy it. All right. So that's it for this one, but never fear. Drive Home Reviews and Forgotten Gems is here. We are going to keep on keeping on. So keep calm and carry on. And as always, drive safe. And I will see you at the movies.